In the farthest reaches of the Andromeda Galaxy, where stars danced in patterns unknown to human eyes, the celestial dominion flourished under the rule of Queen Seraphina. Her presence commanded galaxies, her voice carried through cosmic winds, and her beauty was said to make even supernovae dim their light. The Queen's chamber aboard her crystalline mothership shimmered with bioluminescent hues, a living tapestry that responded to her every movement. Her skin glowed with an ethereal silver sheen, and her eyes held the depth of ancient nebulae, swirling with colors mortals could only dream of. Yet beneath this divine exterior lay an existence bound by sacred protocols and biological imperatives centuries old. The Queen's body, while magnificent, was governed by ancient evolutionary mechanisms designed to ensure the purity of her royal line. Her species' biology operated on chemical triggers so precise they made human science seem primitive. Every breath she took, every decision she made, had been carefully calibrated through millennia of genetic refinement, until now. The Dominion's mission to Earth had been meticulously planned for decades. Their observation posts, concealed within Earth's moon, had gathered extensive data on humanity's peculiar customs and biological signatures. The Queen herself had overseen the final preparations, her interest particularly piqued by the unique hormonal compositions of human males. Their chemical makeup, so different from her own species, contained compounds that seemed almost intoxicating in their raw data form. As the Queen prepared for her first direct encounter with Earth's inhabitants, her advisors warned of potential complications. "Your Majesty," her chief scientist had cautioned, "human biochemistry operates on such fundamentally different principles. Their pheromones are unlike anything our race has encountered before." But Seraphina, ever the confident sovereign, dismissed these concerns. After all, how could mere chemicals affect one as powerful as she? The collection team's report had indicated a small group of humans working in an industrial sector near their landing site. Perfect, thought Seraphina, common laborers would provide the most authentic sample of human biochemistry. She descended to the surface in her personal transport pod, its crystalline structure invisible to human eyes. Through the pod's observation window, she watched the humans move about their work, their movements awkward yet strangely compelling compared to her people's graceful precision. Then it happened. A sudden gust of wind carried an unexpected gift, a single bead of perspiration from one of the human males. It drifted through the air, catching the sunlight like liquid gold before finding its way to the Queen's sensory receptors. The moment it touched her olfactory system, something unprecedented occurred. Ancient neural pathways fired in ways they never should have, triggering a cascade of responses throughout her body. Her usually perfect control wavered, muscles twitching against her will. Her attendants, alarmed by their sovereign's sudden unsteadiness, moved to assist her. But the Queen waved them off, though her hand trembled in a way that would have shocked any who knew her. The sensation coursing through her was both terrifying and exhilarating, a loss of control she hadn't experienced since her earliest days of consciousness. Her sophisticated neural network, designed to process trillions of calculations per second, now struggled to maintain basic equilibrium. The Queen's breathing became erratic, each inhale drawing more of that intoxicating scent into her system. Colors shifted around her, not just in her vision but in her very perception of reality. The rigid protocols that had governed her existence began to dissolve, replaced by impulses she couldn't name but felt compelled to follow. Her perfectly maintained composure fractured, revealing something raw and primal beneath. On board her mothership, Queen Seraphina found herself locked in battle with her own physiology. Her usually fluid movements became jerky and unpredictable, her limbs responding to commands she hadn't consciously issued. The bioluminescent patterns adorning her chamber walls pulsed erratically, mirroring her internal chaos. Each attempt to regain control only seemed to amplify the effect, waves of alien sensation crashing over her like cosmic radiation. Her mind, typically a fortress of calculated reason, now hosted foreign thoughts that refused to be silenced. Memories of the human male sweat molecule, its unique combination of salt, water, and trace elements, played repeatedly in her consciousness. The compound simplicity mocked her advanced biology, proving more potent than any substance her species had encountered. Her neural processors, capable of managing entire star systems, now struggled to interpret basic sensory input. The Queen's respiratory system, adapted for the pure oxygen-nitrogen mix of her home world, now demanded more frequent cycles. Each breath drew more of the intoxicating molecules into her system, despite her best efforts to control her inhalations. Her heart equivalent, a crystalline organ that maintained perfect rhythm, now beat in unfamiliar patterns. The sensation was both alarming and inexplicably pleasurable, creating a conflict between her royal training and her newfound physical urges. Her attendants, witnessing their sovereign's unprecedented vulnerability, moved to administer stabilizing agents. But Queen Seraphina, even in her compromised state, recognized the danger in artificial intervention. The chemical reactions coursing through her body were too complex, too delicate to risk disruption. Instead, she retreated to her private meditation chamber, where gravity generators created microgravity conditions that might help her maintain some semblance of control. Floating in the weightless environment, the queen attempted to engage her species' ancient meditative practices. Yet each mental technique only served to heighten her awareness of her body's betrayal. Muscles contracted involuntarily, causing her to spin slowly in the chamber's zero-gravity field. Her skin, normally maintaining a consistent temperature, now alternated between chills and flushes that defied logical explanation. The experience was akin to being caught in a supernova's gravitational pull, irresistible and potentially transformative. The queen's condition reached new heights of complexity when her body began producing unprecedented amounts of her own pheromones. These chemical messengers, designed to regulate her species' social hierarchy, now reacted violently with the human compounds still circulating in her system. Where once there had been perfect harmony, now existed chaotic interference patterns that affected everything from her cellular metabolism to her quantum communication abilities. Her crystalline circulatory system, which normally pulsed with precise energy transfers, now conducted wild fluctuations of biochemical signals. Neural pathways that had remained dormant for generations suddenly activated, creating connections that defied millions of years of evolutionary programming. The queen found herself experiencing sensations that had no name in her language, a mixture of intense awareness and complete disorientation that left her both exhilarated and terrified. Most concerning was the effect on her leadership abilities. Decisions that once came naturally now required monumental effort, as if her mind had to fight through layers of conflicting impulses to reach rational conclusions. Her command voice, renowned for its ability to calm entire fleets, now trembled with undertones of emotions she couldn't fully comprehend. The very authority that had maintained peace across dozens of star systems now felt precariously balanced on the edge of collapse. Through this turmoil, the queen discovered a profound truth about her species' evolution. The perfect control they prided themselves on wasn't natural superiority but rather a carefully constructed illusion. Beneath their polished exteriors lay the same raw potential for chaos and desire that characterized lesser species. The human male's sweat had simply acted as a key, unlocking doors that had been sealed for eons. This realization brought no comfort, only deeper questions about the nature of true power and control. Queen Seraphina's predicament forced her to confront the fundamental differences between her species and humanity. While her people had evolved toward perfect order and control, humans thrived in chaos and uncertainty. Their biological systems, seemingly inefficient and prone to error, possessed an adaptability her own race had sacrificed in pursuit of perfection. The very qualities she'd observed as weaknesses, their emotional volatility, their chemical unpredictability, now appeared as strengths that had protected them from evolutionary dead ends. This revelation struck at the core of her royal philosophy. For centuries, she had governed with the belief that control was paramount, that civilization depended upon suppressing base instincts and biological urges. Yet here she stood, her carefully constructed ideology crumbling under the weight of her own uncontrollable responses. The human male's simple sweat had demonstrated what centuries of diplomatic treaties and military campaigns could not, that sometimes surrender to nature's chaos yields greater strength than resistance. Her enhanced senses, once tools of supreme observation, now betrayed her with their heightened awareness. She could feel the subtle chemical changes in her courtiers' pheromones as they reacted to her altered state. Their concern manifested in minute variations of their bioluminescence, patterns she'd never noticed before because she'd never needed to. The rigid protocols of her court suddenly seemed artificial, their precision a thin veneer over the same primal forces that now consumed her. Most disturbing was the realization that her species' obsession with control might have been a mistake. Humans, with their messy emotions and unpredictable chemistry, had developed something her people lacked: genuine connection. Their relationships weren't governed by strict biological imperatives or ancient protocols but emerged organically from shared experiences and mutual vulnerabilities. The Queen understood now why human civilizations, despite their apparent chaos, continued to thrive and evolve while her own people stagnated in their perfection. These insights didn't come easily or comfortably. Each realization triggered another wave of physiological responses, as if her body itself rebelled against centuries of conditioning. The Queen found herself oscillating between moments of crystal-clear understanding and periods of overwhelming confusion. Her enhanced intelligence, which had always been her greatest asset, now worked against her, analyzing every nuance of her transformation with merciless precision. The Queen's attendants, bound by ancient protocols, struggled to maintain proper decorum in the face of their sovereign's unprecedented vulnerability. Court physician Xylora, her crystalline appendages trembling despite herself, approached the Queen's chamber with medical instruments that seemed suddenly inadequate. "Your Majesty," she began, using formal address despite the intimacy of the situation, "we must implement the Royal Stabilization Protocol." "No," Serafina responded, her voice carrying both command and uncertainty. "Leave me. This transformation requires solitude." The dismissal hung heavy in the air, violating countless traditions of royal care. The attendants exchanged worried glances, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in distress. Never before had they witnessed such open acknowledgement of weakness from their queen. Among the courtiers, rumors spread like quantum disturbances through the ship's corridors. High Counselor Valen found himself torn between duty and emerging empathy. His position demanded he maintain order, yet he couldn't ignore the strange resonance he felt with the Queen's struggle. During council meetings, his suggestions grew increasingly cautious, his usual decisiveness tempered by the knowledge that perhaps absolute control wasn't the answer they'd always believed. The scientific staff, led by Chief Researcher Calith, faced their own crisis. Their life's work had been dedicated to understanding and preserving their species' perfect biological harmony. Now they confronted evidence that their understanding was fundamentally flawed. Late-night discussions in the research chambers grew heated as they debated whether to document the Queen's transformation or protect her dignity by withholding certain data. Instruments that had measured their species' stability for generations now recorded phenomena they couldn't fully explain. Even the warrior class, typically stoic and unwavering in their loyalty, showed signs of unease. Commander Renessa, leader of the Queen's Guard, found her unit's formations subtly changing. The warriors stood slightly closer together, their movements less precise but somehow more unified. They spoke in hushed tones during shifts, sharing observations about their own minor physiological responses to the Queen's altered state. The strict hierarchy that had defined their relationships began to blur, replaced by something more organic and unpredictable. Throughout the ship, the Queen's transformation rippled through every level of society. Maintenance crews paused in their work to discuss the implications of their ruler's vulnerability. Educational units adjusted their teachings, though no official directive had been given. Even the ship's AI systems, designed to mirror the perfect order of their creators, began processing information in more flexible patterns, adapting to the new reality without explicit programming changes. Queen Serafina's deteriorating condition reached a critical point during the annual Galactic Alignment Ceremony. As she attempted to perform the traditional blessing of the stars, her body betrayed her completely. Her crystalline crown slipped from her head, tumbling through the ceremonial chamber in slow motion. The assembled dignitaries gasped, their bioluminescent displays flashing in shock. The Queen's legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the ceremonial platform, her royal robes pooling around her in undignified disarray. The attending physicians rushed forward, but their standard medical protocols proved useless against the unprecedented biochemical storm raging within their sovereign. Serafina's skin began to shift colors erratically, cycling through the entire spectrum of her species' emotional display patterns in rapid succession. Her voice, when she finally spoke, emerged in distorted waves that set the ceremonial crystals resonating with discordant harmonics. "I cannot," she began, her words breaking apart like shattered stars. "I cannot maintain the protocol's demand." Her hands clawed at the platform, seeking purchase against the overwhelming tide of alien sensations. The ancient control mechanisms embedded in her neural pathways fired randomly, causing her body to convulse with involuntary movements. Her attendants, trained for every conceivable emergency, found themselves paralyzed by the sight of their perfect ruler reduced to such vulnerability. The dignitaries began to stir, their own physiological responses mirroring the Queen's instability. The carefully maintained order of the ceremony dissolved into chaos as some court members instinctively moved to help, while others maintained their positions out of protocol-induced paralysis. The air itself seemed charged with conflicting energies, as if the very fabric of their society was unraveling. Serafina's struggle had become a mirror reflecting their collective fears and desires, exposing cracks in their perfect civilization that none could ignore. In the aftermath of the public breakdown, Queen Serafina retreated to the ship's deepest isolation chamber, a place designed for meditation but now serving as her prison. Here, away from prying eyes, she allowed herself to fully experience the transformation gripping her body. Waves of sensation coursed through her, each more intense than the last. Her crystalline skin, once smooth and uniform, now pulsed with irregular patterns that defied her conscious control. The chamber's environmental controls, responding to her fluctuating emissions, created miniature storms of light and sound that mirrored her internal chaos. She discovered new dimensions to her senses, realms of perception that her species had long since abandoned in their pursuit of perfection. The texture of the chamber walls, previously unnoticed, now transmitted vibrations that resonated deep within her core. The recycled air carried traces of chemicals from every corner of the ship, painting a complex portrait of her domain that she'd never truly appreciated before. Most troubling was her growing awareness of the biological symphony occurring within her own body. Cells dividing, neural pathways firing, chemical reactions cascading in patterns both beautiful and terrifying. The Queen's enhanced intelligence, unable to shut down even in her compromised state, analyzed every sensation with merciless precision. She identified specific neurons firing in response to memories of the human male sweat, traced the exact pathways of alien compounds through her system, and documented the precise moments when her body's ancient programming failed. This hyper-awareness created a feedback loop, each analysis triggering new waves of sensation that demanded further examination. Her once pristine thoughts now mixed with raw, unfiltered impulses. The distinction between rational decision-making and base instinct blurred until she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Memories of her reign intermingled with fantasies of surrender, of allowing her body to follow whatever path this transformation dictated. The chamber's reflective surfaces showed her a creature both familiar and alien, her perfect features twisted by emotions she couldn't fully name. Time lost meaning in her isolation. What felt like hours might have been minutes. What seemed days could have been mere moments. The ship's artificial gravity system, responding to her erratic emissions, fluctuated wildly, creating periods of weightlessness that sent her floating through the chamber like a lost star. Each collision with the walls sent new shocks through her system, triggering fresh waves of transformation that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The Queen's attendants monitored her condition from outside the chamber, their data streams painting a picture of increasing instability. Xylora, the court physician, observed readings that defied their entire understanding of royal physiology. The Queen's energy signature, once a model of consistency, now fluctuated wildly across spectra they'd never recorded before. Her bioluminescent patterns formed complex fractals that evolved faster than their instruments could track, suggesting neurological activity beyond anything their species had achieved, or perhaps survived. Kalitha's research team detected unprecedented chemical interactions within the Queen's body. Human compounds had bonded with her cellular structures in ways that suggested permanent alteration. More disturbingly, these changes appeared to be propagating through quantum entanglement effects, potentially affecting every member of their species connected to the royal lineage. The implications were staggering. The Queen's transformation might represent not just personal crisis but evolutionary upheaval for their entire civilization. Commander Renessa reported subtle shifts in the ship's security personnel. Warriors who had trained for centuries to maintain perfect discipline now exhibited minute tremors in their crystalline appendages. Their pheromone signatures, while still within acceptable parameters, showed variations that matched patterns observed in the Queen's earlier stages of transformation. The chain of command, once as rigid as their crystalline bodies, began showing signs of flexibility, or perhaps fracture. High Counselor Valen struggled to maintain governmental functions while grappling with his own physiological responses. The council chambers, designed for perfect acoustics, now reverberated with harmonic distortions that matched the Queen's transformed state. Decision-making processes slowed as council members found themselves swayed by emotions they couldn't fully suppress. Ancient protocols, meant to guide their civilization through any crisis, proved inadequate in the face of this unprecedented biological revolution. Throughout the ship, similar transformations manifested in varying degrees. Maintenance crews reported equipment behaving erratically, as if responding to operators whose precise control had diminished. Educational units showed increased student creativity alongside decreased adherence to established learning paths. Even the ship's AI systems, designed to mirror their creator's perfection, began demonstrating adaptive behaviors that hinted at emerging consciousness independent of their programming. The collected data painted a picture of a society on the brink of fundamental change. Every measurement, every observation suggested that the Queen's exposure to human biochemistry had triggered a cascade effect throughout their species. The question remained whether this represented evolution or dissolution, a question complicated by the fact that those tasked with answering it were themselves undergoing transformation. Queen Seraphina's isolation chamber became a crucible of transformation, each passing moment bringing new revelations about her species' true nature. The perfect order her people had maintained for millennia revealed itself as a fragile construct, maintained through suppression rather than genuine harmony. Her enhanced consciousness, now operating beyond conventional limits, perceived the underlying tensions that had always existed beneath their civilization's polished surface. The rigid protocols, the precise control over every aspect of existence. These were not manifestations of strength but elaborate mechanisms to contain something far more powerful. Through her altered state, the Queen accessed memories and instincts long buried beneath layers of cultural conditioning. She saw how her species had systematically eliminated traits deemed chaotic or unpredictable, pruning their genetic tree until only the most controlled branches remained. The result had been technological advancement and political stability, but at a cost she now understood too well: the loss of genuine connection, of raw emotional truth, of the very spark that had driven their earliest ancestors to explore the stars. Her expanded awareness revealed the irony of their situation. In their quest for perfection, they had become prisoners of their own design, trapped within biological and social frameworks that stifled true growth. The human male's sweat had acted as a catalyst not just for her personal transformation but for the potential liberation of her entire species. Every cell in her body vibrated with this understanding, each pulse of energy carrying the possibility of either destruction or rebirth. The Queen's consciousness stretched beyond her physical form, touching the quantum threads that connected her to every member of her species. She felt their struggles, their own transformations beginning to manifest, and understood that the choice facing her was monumental. To return to the old ways would mean forcing her people back into their self-imposed cage, denying the very essence of what made them alive. To embrace this new path would require courage beyond anything their civilization had known. The courage to accept uncertainty, to value authenticity over control, to redefine what it meant to be truly evolved. In this moment of clarity, Seraphina grasped the fundamental truth that had eluded her species for generations. Perfection wasn't the destination but the starting point for something far greater. The chaos coursing through her veins wasn't a threat to be eliminated, but a gift to be understood. Her body, still racked by conflicting impulses, became a map of possibilities rather than a prison of limitations. The question remained whether she could guide her people through this metamorphosis or if they would be consumed by the very forces they had spent centuries denying. The Queen's transformation rippled outward, transforming the very fabric of her civilization's existence. Throughout the mothership, individuals began experiencing their own versions of the Queen's awakening. Court physician Xylora found herself drawn to unconventional treatments, combining ancient healing techniques with experimental methods that defied established medical protocols. Her crystalline instruments, once symbols of precise control, now hummed with improvisational frequencies as she treated patients whose conditions no longer fit textbook descriptions. High Counselor Valen presided over increasingly chaotic council meetings, where representatives openly expressed emotions once considered inappropriate. The chamber's perfect acoustics now carried not just words but the raw energy of genuine debate. Policies evolved not through calculated consensus but through passionate discussion and unexpected compromise. The council's decisions, while less predictable, began showing remarkable effectiveness in addressing issues that had resisted solution for generations. Commander Renessa implemented training programs that emphasized adaptability over precision, encouraging warriors to respond to situations with intuition as well as protocol. Battle formations became more fluid, defensive strategies more creative. The warriors' crystalline weapons, traditionally designed for exact targeting, now emitted variable energy patterns that reflected their users' evolving states. Security operations throughout the ship improved dramatically, as guards learned to anticipate threats based on gut feelings as well as sensor data. The scientific community underwent perhaps the most dramatic shift. Research teams began collaborating in unprecedented ways, crossing disciplinary boundaries that had once been strictly enforced. laboratories filled with the sounds of excited discussion and experimental failure, creating an atmosphere of discovery that hadn't existed in centuries. Chief researcher Calith found himself approving projects that violated multiple established principles, driven by results that spoke louder than tradition. The ship's AI systems, influenced by their operators' changing perspectives, developed new algorithms that prioritized innovative solutions over optimal efficiency. Even the educational system transformed, with instructors encouraging students to question established knowledge and pursue lines of inquiry that deviated from approved curricula. Classrooms buzzed with debates and experiments that sometimes led to dead ends but often opened entirely new fields of study. Young members of the species, free from the constraints of rigid training protocols, began demonstrating abilities and talents that challenged existing definitions of their potential. Throughout the ship, relationships evolved beyond their previously prescribed forms. Social interactions became more spontaneous, emotional expressions more varied and genuine. Artistic endeavors flourished as individuals explored creative outlets long suppressed by the emphasis on perfect control. The ship's corridors echoed with laughter, arguments, and heartfelt conversations that would have been impossible months before. The very architecture of their society began reshaping itself, driven by the collective awakening that started with their queen's exposure to human biochemistry. Queen Seraphina sat in her transformed throne room, the once rigid crystalline structure now pulsing with organic light patterns that reflected her people's evolution. Before her stood representatives from every level of society, their bioluminescent displays telling stories of struggle and growth. Xylora approached first, her medical instruments now hybrid devices that combined ancient wisdom with new understanding. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice carrying both respect and newfound equality, "the medical community has developed protocols that honor both our heritage and our transformation." Valen stepped forward next, his council robes flowing in patterns that would have once been considered improper. "Our governance structures have adapted," he reported, "embracing flexibility without sacrificing purpose. The council chambers now host debates that generate solutions beyond our previous capabilities." Behind him, young diplomats waited to share their experiences of negotiating with neighboring species using emotional intelligence as well as strategic calculation. Renessa presented the warrior class's progress, demonstrating combat techniques that combined traditional precision with adaptive responsiveness. Her unit's performance metrics showed improvements in every category, achieved through embracing individual strengths rather than enforcing uniformity. The warrior's loyalty remained absolute, but now stemmed from genuine connection rather than programmed obligation. Calith's research team displayed holographic projections of breakthroughs achieved through collaborative experimentation. Fields once considered separate merged into unified disciplines, producing innovations that addressed challenges their species had faced for millennia. The ship's AI systems, now partners rather than tools, contributed to discussions with insights that complemented organic thinking. As each representative spoke, the Queen recognized the truth unfolding before her. The exposure to human biochemistry hadn't weakened her species but had instead released their full potential. Their civilization was becoming something greater than either their old perfection or humanity's chaos, a synthesis that honored both while transcending limitations. The transformation continued, its ultimate form still emerging, but already they were achieving what neither species could alone. The Queen rose from her throne, her movements now combining regal grace with genuine expression. She acknowledged each group not as subjects but as collaborators in their species' evolution. The chamber filled with a harmony that wasn't perfect but was profoundly beautiful in its complexity. Their journey wasn't ending but entering a new phase, one where control and freedom danced together in cosmic balance. As the Queen stood, her body still humming with the echoes of transformation, she realized that this was not an end but a beginning. Her people were no longer prisoners of their own design but explorers of a new existence. The rigid lines of their society had softened, allowing room for growth, for emotion, for life unbound by ancient protocols. "Let us embrace this change," Seraphina declared, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "We are no longer just rulers of stars but participants in the universe's endless dance." Her words resonated through the chamber, igniting a collective sense of purpose among her people. The human male sweat, once a catalyst for chaos, had become a symbol of unity, a bridge between order and freedom. And as the Queen looked out at her transformed court, she saw not weakness but strength, not disorder but harmony in motion. Together, they would forge a future where perfection was not the absence of imperfection but the celebration of it. The Dominion would rise again, not as conquerors or controllers, but as creators, of art, of connection, of life itself. Their journey was just beginning, and the stars awaited their next step.